Every Business Owner Should Know webinar presented by the Professional Independent Agents Association of Ohio. Your speaker today, again, is Jackie Reindl, CIC, CPIA, CPIW, National Faculty Member for CIC, also instructs CISR and pre-licensing classes, E&O, ethics, and a variety of other continuing and non-continuing education programs. She comes to you with both an agency and claims background, and we'll finish off the webinar talking about what to do when everything goes wrong. It's the old Murphy's Law. If anything can go wrong, it will go wrong. And remember, we've talked before about scenarios, about the possible and the improbable. So let's look at what happens when things go wrong and some of the steps that can be taken to take care of it when things go wrong. Obviously, the most important part of doing something when everything goes wrong is knowing what you're going to do. That involves knowing who you're going to contact, that's knowing initial procedures, and that's knowing that it's in the plan and we're going to work the plan. So fire or water. Fire, unfortunately, destroys. You may end up with some debris that can be recovered. You may end up with some pieces of salvage that can be cleaned up. As always with a fire, though, you want an expert for the kind of material that you're dealing with. Some things like paper, there may be nothing left. But on the other hand, with water, you may end up with paper that is damaged. And most people's initial thoughts with water damaged property, water damaged paper, is to pick it up and get it out in the sun to dry. Quite frankly, that is often the wrong thing to do, because when you have paper that is damaged by water, it's extremely fragile, it distorts, it swells. Quick reaction is necessary, drying is necessary, but with the appropriate equipment that will take out the right degree of humidity, and quite often freezing of wet paper is the right response. The main reason we want a quick reaction to anything that gets wet is because, as mentioned before, the possibility of mold growth within 24 to 48 hours. Freezing actually stops the growth of mold. So it will not only preserve your paper, but will also stop another destroyer of the paper, which is mold, as well as the mold can create other issues. So fire or water, experts are definitely needed as quickly as possible. Though there are a couple things that you can do as the business owner, that your client can do as the business owner to help the process. Remove it from the area where it can be further damaged. Do it carefully, because most of this material is now going to be extremely fragile. Have minimal people involved with it so as to minimize any further damage, and get it to the experts as soon as possible. Now, what to do when there's a power outage? Number one, and this seems silly, make sure it's a generalized power outage and not just something that's going wrong in your location. If it is a generalized power outage, then you're going to have to go to safety mode first. That means make sure that there are no downed wires that can possibly hurt someone. If there are, obviously you call the utility company first. If it's a generalized power outage caused by ice, for example, or accumulation of ice or snow on wires, then what you're going to want to do is go into, okay, we're in dark mode, what do we do now? That's when it's a great idea to have rechargeable flashlights on hand. It's an even better idea to have a generator on hand, a backup generator, as we've discussed earlier. Sometimes candles, the old-fashioned way, but be very, very careful with those, because we don't want to go into the first when everything goes wrong, called fire. Any kind of flashlights, light sticks, anything that will help people safely navigate the facility is very important. Then notify whoever has to be notified, and if necessary, check to make sure everything is off that can be turned off, because what you don't want then is the power surge causing damage when the power comes back on. So turn off everything that you can to save that trouble later. With a computer crash, IT, you're probably going to need IT. If you have it in office, that's wonderful. If it turns out to be the boss's nephew who's studying this stuff in high school, probably not the best call. You're going to need an expert in order to save anything that can be saved, to bring the computer back up and running correctly and safely. This is the time to go to backup with an alternate computer. This is the time to figure out if you have the configurations for the computer for the IT people. Do you have the correct programming available? Any programs that you need? Are the licenses up to date? Of course, now's not the time to figure that. That's during the planning stages. But this is where you need the IT person on call, and with the ability to either walk somebody through it, talk somebody through it, or bring on site as soon as possible. A computer crash can destroy the business by destroying your records. Back up to the cloud, back up off-site server, so that if your computers go down, only the hardware goes down and the software, the information, is safe. Phone outage. If you've got a multi-site location, you're probably all right. Calls can be redirected. There are providers available that will give you forwarding to their location, and it seems as if the call is actually going through your office. But names are taken, and questions are written down, information is provided as okayed by the business owners or the manual. That's more important for the single site, so that if the phones do go down, whether it's the cell phone towers, whether it's landline, calls can be forwarded automatically if you set it up ahead of time. The moment phone system goes down in your area, calls are automatically redirected. That's a system. It's a provider. It can be expensive depending on what kind of services you want from the provider. It can also be very inexpensive relative to losing clients and customers. So those are some things you can do when things go wrong. You will get more detail by bringing in the experts ahead of time to find out exactly what needs to be done. There are experts in all the fields. For example, in fire and water, there are restoration services. I could call out names, but all you have to do is look in your local area under fire restoration or water restoration, and there are plenty of them available, particularly to insurance agents. You get calls, they make calls on you a lot. They also will allow you to observe them doing their work so that you can talk about it more professionally and more succinctly to your clients. Very often they will also let you attend classes on how they do their work so that you can reassure your clients that this is possible. The paper, at one point in my career, I thought paper could not be saved. I now know differently. Almost every piece of paper can be saved if restoration begins soon enough. So go to the experts, look at the restoration experts for fire or water or smoke damage. They can give you the information ahead of time to pass on to your clients. On power outage, there's so much technology out there. Again, you want to go to the experts for power outage, computer crashes, phone outages, because there are services that will provide instant backup, instant redirect, so that there's very little, if any, outage to the business. You want to take a look at those. Make sure your client, if possible, has a list of those available in their manual. Recovery of services and operations. Things have gone bad. Now what do we do? Recovery versus replacement. This is sometimes a hard call, particularly if you're a business that has specialized equipment. You have to make the hard decision, am I going to try to replace this or can it be repaired? This is made usually in conjunction with the insurance adjuster, who will help determine the value, the actual monetary value, versus whether it's just cheaper to replace it. But part of the problem from the business owner's standpoint is, what do I need now to get back up and running as soon as possible? So if I do not have this particular piece of equipment, am I shut down? If I do not have this particular location, am I shut down? There is no alternative location. I've got to have this. So this is a discussion that's going to need to be made with the insurance personnel and the owner of the business as to what is needed. I can't wait for it to be repaired, because that's going to take too long. If, for example, I have a piece of equipment that's going to have to travel over from Europe, what can be done in the meantime to keep me at least running partially? Recovery versus replacement is an important discussion that has to take place early, and it's even better if the client has set aside the information ahead of time on what pieces of equipment or materials or supplies that he or she cannot do without, and that must be replaced immediately. And I'll also understand how the difference in time between repair time versus replacement time. And is there any way of jerry-rigging the piece of equipment? So understanding how each piece of equipment works and where it fits into the overall scheme of things is an important part of the recovery plan. Not every piece of equipment, every computer doesn't have to go in there, but if I make something, if I'm a manufacturer of something, I need to know what of my equipment must be operational and how long it would take to repair versus replace, and I need to be able to pass that on to my insurance person, who's going to probably help me make the final decision. All right, so initially I have to assess the damage. What do I need now? And then, oh, here's a thought. Can I borrow any of the equipment I may need? Does somebody else in the area who was not damaged, will they allow me to use their equipment on their off hours? So will that help me keep up with contracts? Will that help me recover a little faster? So things that have to be considered before the disaster strikes. Dealing with paper-based materials. We talked a little bit at the beginning of this section about how to recover paper-based materials if they're damaged by water, if they're damaged by fire. It's a good idea. In fact, a lot of businesses now don't have so much paper-based materials because they've gone electronic, but you are going to find companies that still do have a lot of paper. One of the plans or elements of a plan when you're dealing with a business that has a lot of paper-based materials is to have backups of those, even duplicates, and keep them separated off-site away from where the originals are. That way recovery is much faster. If they have not done that, however, you're going to have to convince them, or they may be easy to convince, to bring in the experts to get the critical pieces of paper restored, or at least partially restored, as quickly as possible. There is no one answer for damaged paper-based materials because it does depend on what the damage is. Water is actually one of the easier to deal with. Fire is tougher. One of the things you find in other kinds of disasters like flood is that you may not, or wind, you may not be able to find the papers. They are scattered all over the county or state. There have been stories, and documented stories, where paper from Texas ended up in Tennessee, carried by wind. So it's not just a matter of damage, it's a matter of not finding them, which again goes back to part of the plan being, if this paper is that critical, I need to have a backup for it. So I'm going to need, as part of my plan, a duplicate of the most critical pieces of paper, or a copy kept in a safe deposit box or in a vault, and that goes back to lock it up. If it's that important, it should be safe, in a safe. Dealing with electronic data and files. This can be a little more complicated, can be a little more expensive, because this is usually the lifeblood of the business, and retrieval is mandatory. Now, should all your computers be down, you can't access through your own machinery, then it's absolutely critical that we have the backup either through the cloud or an off-site server, so that we can simply go retrieve with a new machine, with a new computer, new tablet, new laptop, whatever. The data is the important part. The actual hardware is the least important part of this. So it's how to retrieve the data, how to retrieve any data that may be on the machine that actually crashed. That's going to require the IT person. That's going to require getting into the cloud and retrieving the information, see exactly what it is that was lost, and then getting that recovered. It's not that big a deal for the people who know what they're doing. It can, however, be very expensive. But losing all of it can be even more expensive. Back it up in the cloud, back it up off-site, back it up in your home. Does not matter as long as there is a backup set available. Dealing with customers' needs. We discussed this somewhat in Part 3. We also discussed the psychology of customers in Part 1. So let's do a quick review of the psychology of your customers. I'm your customer. I have a routine. You're part of that routine. You are now damaged. What do I do? Part of my own survival will be finding another source to satisfy that routine. Part of the communications and part of the planning is the communications, is dealing with the customer who is concerned about the service, about the continuation, about what the customer is going to do now. The business, of course, is primarily concerned with survival. Part of that survival are the customers. So someone has to be assigned to deal with the stress level of the customer, the concerns of the customer, the threats of the customer to go somewhere else, take their business somewhere else, cancel a contract, get a new vendor, whatever the case may be. Someone in the office, in the business, must be assigned that can deal with the customer at all level of stress. And it's just as important to remember that some people in the office should not deal with customers at this time, because we all have people that we know that are not good in stressful situations or are not good with dealing with people who are stressed. Escalating stress level is never a good idea with customers. Calming empathy obviously is best. That's how we want to deal with customers. Someone needs to be assigned, first of all, to understand what the customer's needs are going to be, and then how to address those customers' needs so they will return to the business once the business has recovered from its problems. So that's an issue that needs to be addressed. Next, we've got the plan. We've put it in place. It may even have worked. So let's say there has been a disaster, and now we have the opportunity to see how well did that plan work. This is the review period. This is the chance where we will go back and look at what happened with the disaster and how did we respond to it. Did the communications, with all the employees work? Did the person handling the financial aspect handle it well, or were they too tight or too generous with the business's money? How did the person deal with the media? Did they alarm the public, or did they soothe the public and reassure them that we would be up and running very soon, and just as we were prior to this tragedy? We also want to review how well did our contacts work. Did the vendors, the IT people, the people with whom we had reciprocal agreements, who we had the relocation agreements with, did all that work well, or did it add to and create more havoc? Anything that increases the stress, that increases the complications, that increases the inconvenience and the psychological damage of a disaster needs to be reviewed. Anything that helped make life easier, make my business get up and run faster and just as profitably as before, everything that contributed to business continuation needs to be reviewed. So agents, of course, we want to be the part that helped. So it's a good idea to remind your client after the disaster, how did everything work? Do you have any hints, customer, client? Do you have any hints on what could have worked better? Do you have anything that I could pass on to other clients that might help them if they go through a similar situation? So the business owner needs to review after they've got their business up and running again, they need to review how everything worked. And then if everything did not work as they wanted it to, then it needs to be revised. And that might mean making some people unhappy in the office, some employees, because that might mean it was the employee that didn't work quite right. It might mean replacing some vendors because the vendors didn't come through as they were supposed to do. It might mean revising what I keep in the office in my quote-unquote emergency kit. One thing we never want, of course, to be revised is their insurance agency and program, though this is a great opportunity as an agent to go back in and go, you know, let's go through the checklist again. Let's check the exposures. Is there anything here that you found was an exposure that we missed before? And what would you like to do about it now? Is there anything in here that did not work for you in the program that we've put, in the insurance program that we've put together for you? And let's visit and see what we can do now. All right? So we need to revise and then redo. So the redo is when this program, this plan gets looked at with fresh eyes. Have the employees review it again. See if there's anything in there that would make a major inconvenience for them after another disaster. Redo and update the manual, redo and send it to everybody on that original list. As the agent, ask them if they'd mind sending it to you after it's been revised. Then ask them or encourage your client to do the practice, the drills, the training that they did the first time to make sure that now that it's been revised, we know how it's going to work this time. So all of that is after the disaster. How did what we planned work out? And it's not going to be perfect. We all learn by doing. We all learn by going through things. So the experience is the best teacher. And that's why after the disaster, you review the plan, you revise it, you redo it. Now, after the catastrophe, you want to contact all personnel. Okay? The business wants to contact everybody. Agency, so do you in your own office. You want to double check that everybody's okay, first of all. You want to reassure everybody as much as possible that, yes, we're down now, but with your help, we're going to get back up and running. You want to contact the personnel to make sure that those first two things, but also, all right, now here's your responsibility. Now that something has happened, here's your responsibility. Do you remember? Do you have a copy of the manual? Do you know what to do? This is the time to remind them what is their job. You want to tell your client to have a single catastrophe claim file. just one file where everything that pertains to their disaster goes. It will make it easier for them to deal with the insurance people. It will make it easier for them to deal later with the tax people, if there's any tax breaks or deductions from this. It will be easier for anybody to find, to see when something was ordered, when something is supposed to be received, who they're dealing with at a particular company, who's working, who's not working. Of course you want to tell them to contact you or their carrier as soon as possible after a disaster, because you are their partner and you want them to be in touch with you, and you want to be giving them guidelines and helpful hints and suggestions on how to proceed. You don't want them going off track and doing things that might jeopardize coverage or payment later. The business has to determine its own responsibilities, and this is going to be helped with the assistance of the insurance agency. The business needs to know what it can and cannot do, what it should and should not do. Some people believe it's my business, I can do whatever the heck I want to with it, and that's true. But they also have to accept the consequences of doing what they want to with it. So if there is damage, if there is debris, if something needs to be replaced, encourage them to talk to you, the agency, to determine what their carrier may or may not allow, and make the client aware that some of this might end up being their own responsibility, their own dime. But the business needs to figure out what it can do, how much of its space it's responsible for. If it's a tenant, for example, what part are they responsible for? Just theirs? Are they supposed to help clear access to the entire building? What is that particular client's responsibility regarding its business and the businesses around them? Then the business also has to determine which clients they want to contact, what vendors they want to contact, how much they want to initiate recovery. Because a lot of recovery is going to depend on other people and other businesses, so they need to figure out how much they want to initiate on their own by making first contact, by doing follow-up contacts. What you probably don't have and certainly don't want is a business sits back and go, yeah, we got hit, we're damaged, and now everybody can just take care of me. Because that's a business that's probably not going to continue, much less recover. So by helping them with a disaster plan and setting all this up ahead of time, you're actually helping them figure out what their responsibilities are going to be after the disaster happens. So on to the next. Agencies, this is just for you. Get your agency operational first. I know the first instinct is to contact your clients, make sure they're okay, but you're not going to be able to help a lot of your clients if you're not working first. So everything we've talked about in the 3 previous hours that we've talked about with your clients, about getting their manual up, about getting their business back up and running, it's you first. Because if I'm your client and I call you and you're in a state of chaos, that's not going to be very reassuring to me at all. So you need to be up and running. You need to be in your secondary location. You need to have your phones forwarded. You need to have your computer system up and running with all your files back, or have the secondary, the backup, the dupes in paper. You need to be ready to take my claim. And I'd rather you not do it on a napkin. So in that emergency kit in your office, everything you need to be ready to help a client at first light, or the middle of the night, since many of them will be calling you then. They don't wait till dawn. So get your agency operational up first. That means you should have the disaster plan in place, people assigned responsibilities, somebody ready to take claims, somebody to help take claims, and then go from there. You also want a single catastrophe claim file and a log. Again, this is for your contingency, your loss ratio, because catastrophes go into a separate category and doesn't count significantly against your contingency. You want as much information as possible regarding the catastrophe to provide to your carriers. They're going to want to know the trend as well, and you're going to hear about them first, because no matter how much we have the service centers and we tell our clients to call into the service center to report a claim, in case of disaster, you're going to be getting the call from the client first because you're there and you're local. And they're going to expect you to come out and help them, take a look, reassure them. Be very careful with that, because you can wear agency personnel out trying to visit every claim. So be judicious on the claim sides. You can set up your own parameters on which ones you're going to visit, which ones you're not going to be able to have the time for. So that may go by who's your most important clients, who pays you the most premium, whatever criteria you set up. But try not to visit every claim site, because you're simply going to wear yourself out, and it takes people away from restoring your own facility. Remember the first rule, get your agency operational first. And if you're out visiting everybody else, your agency is going to suffer on the recovery end of it. So keep all that in mind when after a disaster hits. Who do you have to take care of first? Instinctually, you want to take care of the clients, but you can't take care of the clients unless you get up and running first. Make sure the claim forms are filled out properly and completely, because you don't at this point want any delay due to unknown information. So get as much information as you can from people, and realize that people are going to be traumatized if they're standing in the rubble. So just get as much information as possible, particularly contact information. There has to be, you need alternate forms of contact in case communications is one of the systems that is down for your client. So make sure we get alternate information. Adequately inform the insureds regarding their coverages, deductibles, exclusions. If you have somebody who's called that said, I've been flooded, and they don't have flood, don't lead them to believe there may be coverage. This is where you can get into the E&O issues, and you want to be a little careful here. Again, this is if you've pre-planned as an agency, then you're going to have carrier information regarding the coverages and deductibles. You're going to have a copy of active policy files, so that you'll know what the insured has regarding coverage. Know the adjusting procedures for the individual carriers. Some are very fast, some not so fast. So it's nice to know, does carrier X, for example, put people out in the field within 24 hours? Or is it carrier Y who hires a lot of independents who may take a couple days, 2 or 3 days to get up and running? So you need to know the adjusting procedures, and if you have draft authority, does the catastrophe change the draft authority? Change how much you can write a check for. Know how much they want to see. What's the level of damage before they must come out and take a look at something? If it's minor, can it be something that can be at least temporarily repaired? And then after this is all done, and it will be done eventually, after it's all done, as an agency, it's a really good idea to send a follow-up letter to your client to find out, number one, are you okay? Number two, did our carriers do all right for you? Number three, is there any way we as an agency can improve our procedures in case of disaster? Please let us know. We want to make sure you're okay. We want to know if there's anything we can do better. All of that's going to be important, because we're looking at not only healing physically, we're also looking at helping them heal and recover emotionally and psych-wise as well. So all of that's critical in that follow-up letter, to make sure They know we care, not only during but after that they've recovered, and that we would like to improve if at all possible. So send that letter, follow up with it, communicate all the way through this process. Then we go to dealing with the media. Now, as an agent, you're going to deal with the media slightly different than your clients are. As an agent, of course, you're probably going to be hit with the media going, well, the tornado come through here, so tell me what your clients can expect in the way of money. And of course you have no way of knowing because you don't know who has coverage and how much coverage they have off the top of your head. So as an agency, and then I'll deal with clients dealing with the media, as an agency, keep it short. Yes, as the tragic things that happen, we're here for our clients. We'll do everything we can to help them recover. Bingo. You don't want to get into a whole lot of details on your various carriers, what they cover, what they don't cover. Keep it short. Next, keep it simple. If we would try to explain coverages through the media, remember that they do sound bites, that they don't have time to broadcast or the inclination to broadcast your entire conversation. So anything you say can be chopped and edited. So you want to keep it very short and very simple and just stay on message. And remember, we assign somebody to communications. And so that's the person who should be dealing with the media, who can stay calm when a microphone is thrust in their face. And that's not easy. A lot of people, when they get a microphone thrust in their face, just feel the necessity to talk and talk. And it doesn't matter what comes out as long as words are coming out. So somebody who's comfortable speaking in that kind of forum, that they know to stay on message. And if you don't have anybody in the agency capable of doing that, then you need to get help doing that. You need to get somebody in public relations. Now, as a small business, as an agency, you may not feel that you can afford that, but on the other hand, your other alternative is just don't talk at all. You've got nothing to say, you're too busy helping your clients. Okay? That might work, but that can be edited to sound pretty brutal. So if there's going to be any media, then you need help making sure that the message is on track and that it's delivered appropriately. Now for your clients, same kind of rules but different reasoning. They also want to keep it short and keep it simple, because what the message they want to get across if they're asked is not, oh my goodness, look at the tragedy, we're no good, we're never going to recover. The message they want to get across to their customers is that, yes, we took a blow, but we're going to come back stronger than ever. And we, as always, thank our customers for their support. So the message there from your clients to their customers is that, yes, we've been hurt, but we're going to get back up, we're going to be better than ever, and so don't go running to anybody else. That's the subliminal message there. They probably won't need help because the media also has a short attention span, so an individual business is probably not going to keep their attention for long, at least in the small business. Now if it were large business that went up in smoke or something, that's going to keep their attention longer. But a small business just isn't that big a story for them. An agency might be a bigger story for them because you have lots of businesses insured. And people, fortunately, unfortunately, don't care for what we can or cannot do in any circumstances. But they expect a whole lot more when a disaster hits a community. So from the agency standpoint, when dealing with the media, keep that in mind as well, that you may end up speaking for the entire insurance industry in your community. So just something to keep in mind. Disaster resources, excuse me. Notice who I put first, insurance agent. Now, if you as the agent do not already have a disaster plan, let me remind you, you can get them from a variety of places, including PIAA of Ohio. They have a disaster plan readily available to any insurance agent. So if you're a member of PIAA or would like to be a member of PIAA, which is a good idea, but please contact them. They will be happy to get you a copy of the disaster plan. You get one in place, you're ready to help your clients. So insurance agent, trade association, great place to start for a disaster plan. Remind your clients of that. And again, remember, this is kind of the kind of thing that's going to separate you from the agency down the street. That you have that extra little pow for your clients. The Red Cross is a good place to look for a disaster plan. Yes, they're there afterwards. They would like to be there less afterwards, so they have a disaster preparedness plan so that people, individuals, and businesses are more prepared and need less help from the Red Cross after a disaster, so that the Red Cross can focus its attention where it's needed most. National Flood Insurance Plan and NFIP has a disaster preparedness plan, because a flood is a pretty bad disaster. So the more prepared you are, the more you know what to do, particularly if you're in a flood area, the less likely you're going to need after the fact. FEMA, tons of them on the internet. You can go right to their website, and there's templates, there's plans, there's preparedness kits for both small businesses, large businesses, homes. So agent, as an aside, we're talking small business, but this is something to consider for your personal lines people as well. So go to FEMA's website. They have several places available. Vendors. You got an IT? You got an IT that helps you with your computers? They probably have a disaster preparedness plan for computers. In fact, I know they do. So if you check with your IT people, they'll tell you how best to hopefully prevent issues, but then once an issue happens, how to recover more quickly and more financially responsibly. Your physical, I've already mentioned your restoration places, and that is go see them work, go get ideas on how to prepare and preserve your own material. Every place, there is just no reason not to have a disaster preparedness plan available for you and your clients. Ready.gov is another source. SBA, Small Business Association.gov. Internet, I've already talked about that tons of times. So there's all kinds of ways to look at this. The one thing that I would never want you as an agency to have to face is that your client goes to the media and says, well, I thought I had insurance, but let me tell you what happened. We're never going to be able to reopen. We're never going to be able to get recovered because I didn't have any help from my insurance agency. So not only from the money standpoint, but from the planning standpoint, as an agent, I want you to be ready to be the hero for your clients. So just in a quick review on some of the things we've talked about during this webinar session. You've got one of the things that is the hardest thing to remember is the human reaction to disasters. Disasters definitely impact the physical plant, definitely impact assets, definitely impact property. But the impact on the humans is often overlooked and therefore not responded to. We have to remember the curiosity. We have to remember the denial and panic. The, oh my gosh, it happened, now what am I going to do? And the nice thing is, with a disaster plan in place, what we're going to do changes to, now here's what we're going to do. Because I went from panic to prepared. I don't want to feel the anxiety. I want to feel the anticipation of getting back up and ready. There are so many things that can happen to a small business that if it happened to a large business would not be so critical. Because remember, the large business has the capital. It has the resources. It has the people that can help them deal with a catastrophe. Small business is limited in all three regards, particularly when it comes to capital. They simply don't have the resources there to get back up and running as fast as a larger company could. So it matters how the small business responds. Things to consider is where's your small business located? One of the things I didn't mention is that if your small business is out in a rural area rather than a city, resources may be more limited. It's likely that less things may happen to that business in a rural setting, but unfortunately when it does happen, resources are more limited because it's out and away from the city or county resources that may be available to people living in a community, in a more crowded community. So keep in mind when you're talking with your clients, they may need different resources for where they are. Also, are they a single location, multi-location? That's going to make a difference in their planning. If I'm a standalone business, then I need to be able to recover on my own. And that means my plan is going to have to be more detailed. I'm going to have more resources, or more resources that I can tap into to help me recover. The types of losses, we talked about all kinds of weather-related losses, but we also have to consider very deeply. The nice thing about weather-related losses and accident-type losses is that most of those are going to be taken care of by insurance, because we as insurance agents do our job and do it well. There are some other kinds of losses, though, that we're not, as business owners, we don't even want to contemplate and don't really want to think about too much because it taps into our own mortality. So the natural disasters, the weather-related disasters, we can deal with. The other kinds of issues, the personal type disasters, when we're talking about a key employee being terminated or disabled or dies, that's another issue. That can put us down just as much as a total fire loss could. And the death or disability of a principal can absolutely devastate a business if there's no plan in place, whether insurance or otherwise. So when we're talking about disaster, we as insurance people tend to look at the things we can cover with a policy, but we also have to look at other kinds of disasters that might impact the business, and if not impact, maybe even destroy them. So when we're talking with the client, we talk about the kinds of disasters that might happen, how long it might last. One of the slides I showed you in the first one showed that 37% of small businesses had no clue how long it would take to recover from a disaster. That's not good, because in order to plan, we really need to know our business better than that. The basic elements of a disaster response plan is, first of all, what can happen? Not only what's probably going to happen, but what's improbably going to happen. What's the likelihood that a satellite could crash on my building? That's pretty unlikely. It's improbable. But is there a small inkling, a small bit of a chance that it might? Absolutely. So we have to identify the fire, the possible. We also have to identify the improbable. Where the client goes from there is going to be ultimately their decision, how they want to deal with it. Then the client has to determine who's going to make the plan. And then once the plan is established, who's got the responsibility once the tragedy or disaster happens? Who's going to take the responsible, okay, let's go team responsibility? And again, that's knowing your employees. Recovery, who's paying for it? How's it being paid? What am I going to insure? What am I going to use loss control techniques with? What resources do I have other than money? Like, do I have people willing to do work so I don't have to hire people, other people? So the idea is to identify that kind of information ahead of time So we're not standing in the rubble making those decisions, which usually will end up being wrong at that point. Panic decisions are hardly ever right. Training has to come. Both the owner and every employee has to be trained in some way, shape, or form. To the extent, that's up to the owner. You know, I mentioned CPR may not be necessary, but do I want to know how to recover? Do I want somebody in my office to know how to recover computer data? Do I want somebody in my office to know how to restore documents? Or do I want to have the experts on standby for all of that? Made a point of telling you that the plan has to be in writing. And I'm a firm believer, and this is just my opinion, that even if you have it on CD-ROM or jump drive distributed to lots of people, key people, it's still a good idea to have a backup tucked away safe somewhere in writing. And then obviously, once it's written and everybody approves of it, or the key people approve of it, multiple copies, managers, supervisors, and central location for everybody to have access to. Plan then has to be reviewed at least annually, if not seasonally, because things happen different times of the year, and you don't want to be the one reviewing it after it happens or trying to figure it out in the middle of it happening. So just review it on a regular basis, update it as things change, as people change, so that responsibilities get shifted as personnel get shifted. Look at preventing disasters by doing things like backing up files, having off-site storage, have an alternative location ready, so that when the tornado hits, you know exactly where you're moving to and how we're going to set up shop. Have floor plans, computer configurations available, so that you know where things were and you know what's missing and what's not where it's supposed to be. Assign responsibilities according to the skill set of employees. Somebody has to be in charge of the initial fiscal responsibility, administrative, cleanup, communications. Do it according to skill set and what people are willing and able to do. Prioritize the recovery and restoration processes. Everything is not equally important. It's hard in the moment to figure out what is and is not important. So if we plan ahead of time, we can go, oh, I absolutely have to have my accounts receivable. I've got to keep money coming in. That's critical. Or my customer list is the most important thing I own as a business. So you have to order, you know, and where I get supplies, not so critical, because that's going to be down the road a little bit. So prioritize what has to be recovered and who has to be contacted. What has to be restored? What piece of equipment must I have that I cannot do without, that I cannot possibly recover without? And same with people. Who do I have to keep? If this business is going to be down for a while, what employees are really important for me to keep? Preparing the office, we talked about lock it down, cover it up, back it up. In other words, keep it safe, protect it, and make sure you have duplicates somewhere, somehow. Keep your data especially safe. Prevent or mitigate the after disaster loss through theft or vandalism or looting. Just keep the after disaster loss to a minimum. Prepare the staff, make sure the staff know what their duties are following the disaster, during the disaster, and when do I get to come back? If I'm not part of the initial responsibility, when am I coming back? And then keep everybody on script so everybody in the office knows what to say to customers, to media if they get involved, but primarily as the owner of the business, it's the responsibility to reassure, to empathize, to understand. that everybody involved in this disaster is going through physical and mental issues that are going to impact the recovery of the business and will impact how well all the physical plant, the materials, the equipment, supplies, everything gets back in order so the business can get up and running at full recovery as soon as possible. Agents, remind your businesses their best friend at time of disaster is you. That's my conclusion on this. The best friend of any business in a disaster is the insurance agent. So it's a really good idea for you to be prepared, for you to be ready to roll in case of disaster, so that they, your clients, are reassured that life will return to normal, the business will return to profitability. And so when we say get ready, get set, get recovered, the client believes us. Thank you very much for your time, and have a really great day.